jawbones disconnected from the neck bone, the arm bones detached from the shoulder bone, the ribs bones cut loose from the backbone, the leg bone was lying off the hip bone, them bones, even resurrected psychopathic bones, and the skulls go rolling along.
There's a quad jet in the hangar.
You're not coming?
I must atone for what I have done. But I cannot bring myself to leave her.
Run.
What do we find so fascinating about the super zombie? Zombies by themselves are already pretty fucking annoying. Here we have what could just be another facet of fiction, another species or monster type that we see from time to time, but with a load of iconic media that either depicts, revolves around, or is just about zombies, you cannot escape them, which was a point of irony until that too was overdone.
These creatures cannot be considered human. They attack and they feed only on warm human flesh.
Funnily enough, you could say the same thing about the superhero. What once was a fringe counterculture has now seen so much exposure in the last 16 years that even the subversive takes are becoming pretty blasé. Blackest Night was a grand intro into comics for me. I had been into superheroes forever, but aside from some Marvel magazines about fucking Power Pack, Blackest Night was my first physical foray into this wonderful world of picture books. Black Lanterns do not feel like zombies, despite being that very thing. All of them don't mindlessly shamble, a great many of them are intelligent, have all the memories they had while living, and speak perfectly. The black rings control corpses, not the other way around. And if you didn't have a significant emotional connection specifically to a super person or were not one yourself, then you stayed dead. Which is a long way of saying that the very nature of the Black Lantern is one of purpose, in direct contrast to the mass wave of mindlessness that characterizes the entire zombie genre. And don't let me cap too hard. It's not that I don't like zombies, I just hate them culturally for how low the bar has been set. Warm Bodies is a woefully refreshing take for being Romeo and Juliet with a zombie backdrop. But for everything I don't like or understand about zombies, I feel completely different about raising the dead. Which sounds like quite the split hair, but let me make it simple. Zombies are the dead already risen. I'm talking about the process of raising them. To give life and meaning to what has been extinguished, to give a future to the past tense, the very imagery of a hand erupting from a grave is chilling and powerful because everything dies and nothing comes back. Even reincarnation is not reanimation. Once gone, what was will never be quite the same again. And in the right context, a zombie is a stark reminder of everything that we lose when we lose a life. A smile, a laugh, even just the ability to look at someone's healthy face is removed when they die, and the pictures and videos we take can never replace that. Leave it to humans to take the miraculous concept of The Walking Dead and make you tired of it. There's actually a really powerful moment during the Blackest Night Titans issue involving Donna and her husband and baby, but I'm just gonna recommend that you go read that now, and we'll get into that some other time. Adding superhumans to the mix was a given because super beings die all the fucking time. But if the death is significant enough to happen at all, then the character will be back before you can spell Iceman, Jean Grey, and Kamala Khan backwards. The only characters that stay dead long enough to be relevant zombies are characters that were expendable in the first place. And nowhere do you find significant superpowered nobodies with just enough development to be missed like you find in mutants. Wake the fuck up, Krakoa. We are talking about mutants over here at the forum, and with the Mutant Massacre video serving as a great intro to mutants for the channel, let's get into some mutant zombies. Death is not new to the X-Men. In fact, it's an old friend. Every original X-Men and every member of the Giant-Size team has suffered a canon death and then came back. Some more than a few times. Krakoa's biggest claim to fame was resurrection, and I'm honestly surprised that we haven't gotten a dead X-Men book sooner. Looking forward to that, by the way. The Exhumed are a a very special group of mutants, and I feel a bit of honor being able to talk about them today. With the Krakoan era rebranding and relaunching obscure X-Men stories, I'm surprised that this group and the mutants present don't make any type of resurgence. Some of them do, but not in ways that matter. The Exhumed are what happened when there is so much X-gene to go around that it starts showing up in one-off stories. Literally you getting chocolate in my peanut butter. Debuting in the sensational She-Hulk comics, the Exhumed are a group of dead mutants brought back to life by generic witch doctor type number 9, Black Talon, who is under the impression that dormant mutant abilities are worth the trouble of international occult smuggling and going to blows with Miss Walters. Talon reanimates 4 mutants: former Black Bishop Harry Leland, crook turned decoy changeling, a literal Who called the Living Diamond, and the tragic Scaleface. Between them, that's 2 forms of shapeshifting, the strength and durability of a diamond-skinned, and gravity manipulation. That's not the worst suite of powers, and if the Exhumed were just a team of 4 non-corpse mutants, I think they would be notable or at least worth the mention. Shame that all they do is shamble about impersonating Elvis. But who are the Exhumed? Like, why them specifically? Working on the Mutant Massacre video, I found myself looking through a lot of pages of mutant death. 2 words that my heart seems to cringe at every time I hear myself say them, and 2 words that I'd like to bring attention to now. The X-Men at some point became a stand-in for a whole lot of civil rights stuff, and every minority can get in where they fit in. The transcoding applied to the death of Wolvesbane made for a ghastly read. Like, I love Wolvesbane. I'll save the New Mutant fangirling for another day, but watching a beloved character beat to death because of what someone thought they were was a yikes experience. It was hard to watch, and I instantly felt bad for the multitude of people who have lost their lives because of how someone else felt about their identity. It was a mindfuck knowing that this happens in real life. It's an evil world we live in. So with so much time and intent put into making the mutant struggle analogous with oppression everywhere, you make my stomach hurt when you take the darling Scaleface and turn her into a zombie. So you're telling me I could survive a genocide, defend myself from a hate crime, get shot by the police, and then not even my corpse is safe? And not even because I'm me. Like, not because I'm special, just because I'm one of them. Special enough to use my powers, but I'm just another mutant.
It's an evil world we live in.
Remember this tangent. It will be important later on. So let's put the Whom in the Exhumed. First up, the Living Diamond. Jack Winters is chronologically the first evil mutant, if you believe his gaudy origin story title. As part of Cyclops' lore, when his mutant abilities drove him away from home, as they do, he runs into this strange man in the woods claiming to be a mutant himself. Jack uses a degree of telepathy and mental persuasion to affect Cyclops' mind. It seems like he can't directly mind control him, but he can implant suggestions. The superpowers don't stop with this guy, because not too long after meeting Scott, he teleports them away to a power plant that Jack has been plotting on with the intention of putting Scott in on the plot, while threatening to put him in a plot if he doesn't cooperate. See, Jackie used to work at this plant, but in order to expedite the payment of some gambling debts, he breaks into his job, fucks up with the isotopes because he's stupid, and ends up with superpowers because of it. You know the spiel. 2 shiny, unbreakable diamond hands, a suite of minor mental powers, and the teleportation, apparently. His actual power seems to be radiation resistance, or maybe the Rads jump-started his X gene. I love a good mutant imposter, but if Cyberno picks up Jack as a mutant, then his genes are good, even if all of his powers come from the exposure to radiation. And yes, I said Cyberno, not Cerebro. Do your homework.
Do your homework, bro.
Once Jack and Scott are in the plant, Xavier tries to stop them, but Jack tosses a beam at Xavier and makes it to the machine he was looking for. He gets in this fucking popcorn machine and butters himself up with so much radiation, and out emerges the Living Diamond. Jack is such a weirdo. I would do some odd jobs for some superpowers myself, but aside from does whatever a diamond does, Jack literally just created a nightmare power scenario, unable to feel any kind of sensation except for whatever can hurt a diamond, I guess. He effectively gives himself a super disability. Afterwards, Professor X manages to convert Cyclops and pack Jack up in half an issue, luring him into a sci-fi something that atomizes Bro, effectively killing him. That is until 2022, where we find out that the machine didn't kill Jack, and in the final moment he teleported away. Department H, which is just Canadian SHIELD, just so happened to find Jack one day when they were using a mutant locating device that so happened to assemble his scattered atoms, after which they immediately put him to work with Wolverine for some lore stuff that I couldn't begin to fuck or give about. In the mission, Wolverine would decide that he's had enough of Jack's shit, and impales him through the torso, hoists him up in the air, and shakes, rattles, and rolls his ass to pieces. Wolverine hypothesizes that Jack could have teleported, but he stays dead and in pieces enough for our boy Samuel here to gather him up and make him a part of the zombie squad. A special thanks to the creators behind X-Men Legends for keeping everything in place all these years later. The story where Jack resurfaces takes place right in between Wolvie's fight with the Hulk and his first time as an X-Men, so even with this alternate ending to the Diamond story, he is still dead by the time Talon needs to resurrect him, and you gotta get love for them remembering She-Hulk. So what does he do as a zombie? He hurts the She-Hulk's hand and gets whooped in tandem with the rest of them. How lovely, all that work for Jack specifically, and for what?
And now he broke my hand!
Kevin Sidney, the Changeling, no not that one, is once again an age-old X-Men villain who surprisingly also got his origins tangled with that of an X-Men, this time being Banshee. When Banshee first debuts, he is a villain working with a group of crims named Factor 3, of which Mr. Sidney was a part of. Factor 3 is a gang of mutants controlled by a figure called the Mutant Master, who is really just a tentacle monster in disguise. The members of Factor 3 were not too fond of the deception and would turn on the Mutant Master, leading to his defeat and the dissolution of the team. Sometime after that, the Changeling would appear to Professor X with the news that he's been diagnosed with cancer and would like to use the little bit of time that he has left to do some good, in hopes that he can redeem himself a little for his life of crime. The professor at the time had just so happened to discover an impending alien invasion and wanted to go into hiding to prepare, asking Changeling to use his own shapeshifting ability to masquerade as leader of the X-Men in his absence. Xavier also managed to give Kevin and Jean some of his psychic powers before he went into hiding, but that doesn't seem canon or relevant at all. Changeling as Professor X would die in battle against Grotesque, yet another subhuman who has some beef with the surface. The death of X is treated as such for some time, with only Jean knowing that it wasn't really the professor who died. The team would be without their wheelchair for about 20 issues, give or take, and then Professor X emerges from the basement of the mansion, having been there the whole time. And after telling the team that a fucking shapeshifter was killed in his place, proceeds to train and prepare them for the alien invasion. Changeling is a bit strange. He is so side character that he shows up and is like, sure, I'll be your plot twist, no problem. I'm about to die anyway, which also means that no matter how it happened, the professor's plan always had a chance of traumatizing the team, as Kevin was probably gonna die as Xavier naturally, if not in combat. When he shows up as a zombie, his role as optimal side character does him some good, as he's the only one who tries to rebel against Black Talon's control when he can. Apparently, controlling all 4 of his fucking zombies was quite the feat for Dr. D-list Voodoo over here, and Changeling on 2 occasions uses that gap in Talon's control to try to help the She-Hulk. First time Jennifer doesn't quite get it and mistakes his attempt to free her friend with an attack, and like a bowling ball into some pins, chucks Kevin into the rest of the zombies. Black Talon gathers his corpses in a hearse no less and speeds off, where Changeling for the second time interfered by shifting into Elvis Presley in front of some cops, prompting them to give chase. The cops of course report an Elvis sighting because white comics, which leads to She-Hulk finding and stopping the Exhumed. All thanks to Kevin, who in the end says that he did everything he could to end his life on a good note and wasn't gonna let Talon mess that up for him. That's a real noble end for Buddy, and it was nice to see at least someone's backstory get applied in this little one-off. Changeling's only character ends up being that of a bad guy who doesn't want to die bad, so much so that even when resurrected for evil, he isn't with it. The simplicity and the irrelevancy of Kevin Sidney shines in this tale of dead mutant nobodies, and that sure is something. On to the next shambles. This is the last zombie before we get into my favorite obscure lizard girl, and so let's get into Harry Leland. What do y'all know about the Hellfire Club? A group of quasi-villains that are now just a rather neutral part of the lore. The Hellfire Club are just a version of the Illuminati, or SWORD. Its origins and purposes as a group are there, though their identities are always subject to change. But be it the Hellfire Club or trading company, there's a select few characters you can always count on to be hellfiring it up, one way or another. Emma Frost and Sebastian Shaw are probably the most popular, but a name I'm sure that is easy to forget is Harry Leland, a former Black Bishop of the group from an older time of the X-Men, though he has been seen on Krakoa. It's hard to give a fuck about Leland because as prolific to the X-Men myth as Hellfire is, if your last name isn't Frost or Shaw, you will be largely left out. Leland is just a typical villain type, with the power to increase the mass of things without increasing the size, increasing the effect the gravity has on said person or object. Cool enough power killer, though it doesn't let him get too physical, unlike Emma and Sebastian, who were some brawler types. I can't stress how much of a who Leland is, because who gives a fuck about shady business type number 7 with gravity power? Black Talon, apparently. Leland dies during a fight with Nimrod, who was trying to turn a battle between the Hellfire Club and the X-Men into a 2-for-1 deal. Leland just so happens to be so fat and useless that just using his powers on Nimrod gave him a fucking heart attack. He closes his casket in style, though, as Storm asks him for one final use of his power by bringing a recently knocked into space Sebastian back to Earth onto Nimrod, using up his last little bit of life and power to do some good. A shame it would be against Nimrod, though, who would go on to terrorize and murder mutants to this very day, if that doesn't take the wind out of your sacrificial sails. As a zombie, Leland actually has a nice little power interaction with She-Hulk. He mounts the first attack on Jennifer using his power to make her too heavy to move, until Jen uses the extra mass to fall forward, causing a shockwave that hits the Exhumed, and then Harry doesn't do a fucking thing after that. At this point, the Exhumed are looking like a barely who's who of forgotten X-Men villains, and for a one-off She-Hulk comic, that isn't terrible. I think Predator X is worse than this shit, and Predator X makes much more sense. Leland is just a part of the not too important past. Not around long enough to have mattered in the first place. The only reason he even makes it to the Exhumed is because of his ties to the Hellfire Club, and if it wasn't for that, Talon probably could have brought back fucking Riptide. We're finally showing a non-villain some love. It's time to discuss the Morlock, the Tunneler, Scaleface. Scaleface is one of the many sad stories found amongst mutants. Showing up and dying in her first appearance. As a Morlock, she of course was driven away from the sewers during the massacre, and unlike most, made it out alive, which I'm sure felt like a positive at the time. Scaly is a member of a subgroup of Morlocks called the Tunnelers, who apparently hate the main group, calling them drain dwellers and shit, because everyone finds their own slur. They attack X-Factor at first, believing them to be the Marauders, but once that's cleared up, they end up following them to their headquarters for safety, just narrowly making it out of the underground before Thor roasts them all with hot plasma. The original shtick behind X-Factor is that to the public, they were mutant hunters, but they are actually mutant saviors using their public rep to keep mutants safe. The Tunnelers being so xenophobic that they can't even stand the Morlocks, can't accept X-Factor's two-facedness, and don't know what to believe between what they're telling them and what they know for themselves. Even though I'm saying the Tunnelers, I really just mean Berserker, the fucking Finhead who runs the team and is a romantic interest of Scaleface. He has a hard-on for the particular brand of edgy that the 80s seem to offer, alpha and angry whenever he's not angry and alpha. The Tunnelers all decide that they would rather kick it on the streets and using the powers of one of their members' mask, disguise themselves, sneak out of the X-Factor complex and run right into the Savage Wolf Gang. Some 80s thugs who have a hate boner for mutants because this is a mutant book. These are Watchmen type thugs who are very casually willing to murder passersby and strangers over nothing at all just because they have the time. The bad guys approach the wayward group of mutants when Zerker instructs Mash to drop their disguises, hoping that the reveal would scare the thugs away. This activates their bloodlust and the mutants are immediately fired upon. The group of course retaliates, swissing their cheeses and frying their eggs as it were. One of the thugs calls the cops, and before you know it, the Tunnelers and the cops are waging war in the street, attracting the attention of a local team of mutant hunters named X-Factor. Scott and Jean mean the best, but they make everything worse. And part of me thinks that without their involvement, maybe Berserker and Scaleface could have made it out alive. On arrival, Cyclops, probably still agitated with the group, fires on Scaleface and Berserker when they refuse to stop fighting. In an attempt to protect his boo, Berserker would push Scaleface from her cover, leaving her exposed to the cops. Frightened and face to face with a load of lizard dragon-phobic cops, Scaleface transforms into her dragon state and is shot down right there. This would push Berserker over the edge, and like his namesake, he gets to wildin', single-handedly fighting off the cops while talking a bunch of human killer talk. Berserker has the ability to manipulate and control electrical energy, absorbing from any electromagnetic source in the city. In a city surrounded by streetlights, cars, and buildings, Berserker proves to be a bit of a powerhouse, overpowering the police completely by himself. Berserker's made of some tough stuff, but that Summers DNA is much tougher. Cyclops shoots Berserker into some nearby water, and in an instant, all of the absorbed energy is ripped from his body, killing him. Which is exactly the point that you remember, oh right, Morlock, shitty powers. Through all this Morlock research, I found myself attaching to Scaleface and Cybele. Even though all they amount to is fodder, the time taken to characterize them at all makes me sad about their demises. Scaleface shows up and is shown the way out in the same same issue, and yet everything she says while alive is campaigning for peace and community instead of the conflict and bloodshed that the tunnelers have grown accustomed to. She hopelessly tries to convince Berserker to trust X Factor, and when they leave, she at least prevents him from starting a fight on the way out. Understandably, Berserker has grown cold to humans because of their mistreatment. It's a familiar condition. Scaleface, on the other hand, just wants the fighting and the dying to stop. She transforms out of fear, but deep down she was never gonna hurt the cops. She just wanted to survive, and it hurts Berserker's soul to see the would-be pacifists of the group shot down out of unjust fear. While the cops did have every reason, Scaleface genuinely didn't mean any harm, and it gets her killed anyway. She retains none of her character when she's resurrected and doesn't do much of anything besides have this little banter with She-Hulk about her turning into a dragon, and then she gets punched in the fucking mayonnaise. Scaleface is all the sorrow of the Exhumed. 3 of the 4 are fucking criminals, and Kevin already did his best to atone. Scaleface really didn't actually do anything except for maybe kill a human or two, possibly out of self-defense. She flees from her home to escape a purge. She only defends herself from the Savage Wolf Gang, and she is only defending herself when she gets shot down. For some voodoo bozo to repurpose her corpse, having spent so much of her life on the run and in hiding, already feels woefully disrespectful. The Exhumed themselves make you feel like nobody gives a fuck about mutants. The Justice League keep the corpses of their enemies under lock and key, but apparently some goober can just steal and recycle the powers of any mutant he finds. Jack dies justly and in pieces, so while I do have questions, it doesn't bother me that he's here. But the X-Men were present for Scaleface, Changeling, and Leland's death. Maybe it's fuck Leland, because at the time, who's actually thinking about using the dead powers of overweight mutants, but Scaleface and Kevin? Kevin is buried as Xavier. There is no supervision of the grave, question mark? I mean, damn, once Xavier reveals it was the double, do they just throw his body out of the casket and stop overlooking the corpse? Scaleface dies damn near right in front of Jean and Scott, and yet still no protocol for the body. Mutants live as feared pariahs in life and aren't even entitled to peace and death. Everyone here would be resurrected again for one reason or another, except for Kevin, because fuck that weird ass doppelganger. Mutants would revive Leland for some Hellfire shenanigans, and while I couldn't give a fuck about it, it's nice to see the respect and care for the dead that the Krakoan era brought to the X-Men. Because unlike real life, these characters never really die and just wait on the metaphorical shelf until a writer cares enough to say otherwise. There would be terrorist attacks behind the Exhumed if Krakoans ever heard about it, I tell you what. The Black Talon spends nearly a year on the Exhumed, searching for the bodies, retrieving them, getting them all inside the old X-Men costumes that he also needed to find. And for what? To be stopped by the motherfucking She-Hulk? I already thought Talon was stupid, but once I tell you exactly how he gets mixed up with She-Hulk, you'll see that he's a downright fool. The very construction of the plan is what causes it to go awry. The living Diamond's corpse, through all of the smuggling, ends up in an unmarked grave. Talon doesn't know exactly where, and so he sends a zombie to awaken the whole cemetery, because in his literal bird brain, that must make sense. The plan is successful, and the diamond is retrieved, but what Talon didn't count on was the very zombie he sent to awake the dead, breaking free from his control and murdering someone who wronged him while he was alive. It's that murder that attracts the attention of She-Hulk and her employer when they are alerted to a murder committed by someone who's been dead for 8 years. Jennifer and Wheezy would investigate, tracking down Black Talon's alter ego to New Orleans, where he reveals that one of the spells he puts on his zombie is one that compels all who come in contact with it to seek him out. He doesn't plan on Jennifer getting involved, but he improvises and uses a special necklace to take control of her somehow, and uses her to retrieve the last of the Exhumed that he had smuggled in. It's while Jen is helping Talon and his assistant Garth to prepare the ritual that the necklace snaps, and a fight between Garth and Jen ensues, giving Talon enough time to awaken the Exhumed, where after which they fight Jen for a little bit until BT hightails it out of there, leading to all that Elvis business I was talking about during the Kevin Sidney section. For anyone counting, that is 2 times that a zombie has slipped from Talon's control to put a wrench in his plans that would lead to failure. For all of his grand X-resurrection and corpse smuggling, you would think that keeping your zombies under the spell would be priority 1. Here, Black Talon is failing to properly handle 4 mutants with some okay powers, like gravity manip, indestructibility, and 2 brands of shapeshifting aren't enough to take down a Lady Hulk, even though I'm sure Brother Voodoo could do it. Perhaps Black Talon is a good enough sorcerer or voodoo man. Yeah, he fucked up with the wayward zombie, but over time, with the exhumed under his prolonged control, I can see a world where he wields their perfectly functional mutant might to some effect. A world never brought to life because Samuel here made the stupid decision of bringing She-Hulk to the actual ritual site. Like this cockamamie-ass plan was ever gonna yield some fruit. In time, Berserker and Scaleface both are resurrected during the Necrotia event, so Talon was at least not alone in feeling like the bodies of dead mutants were worth a damn. He's just weird for doing it when he's not a mutant himself. Given how quickly the whole thing falls apart, it's kind of like bringing your rig of mind control arms online for the first time in front of your enemies and then expecting it to go well just because you watched Spider-Man 2 and thought I too could be a not-so-surprise antagonist. Now that I've brought you up to speed on the whom of the exhumed, I hope that better puts into context the weirdo shit that Talon is trying to pull with this. He collects 4 random bodies of a soon-to-be endangered species and drapes them in age-old supersuits in hopes that they would serve as a team. The individuals used weren't friendly or associated with each other while living in the slight, and none of them were particularly powerful while they were alive. And the end result, literally on paper, is much more trouble than it's worth. Talon already has a super strong thug who could reasonably do anything that you would ever need a Diamond or Leland to do. She-Hulk herself theorizes that the exhumed only ever came to pass as a way of boosting her sales with mutants on them, and the foolishness of the plan supports that theory. After Talon crashes his getaway hearse, and yes, it's a hearse because zombies, Ginny and Wheezy try to give the exhumed proper burials, filling their mouths with salt and sewing them shut to stop someone else from waking them. This doesn't work ×2, but it doesn't happen on panel, so who cares? Scaleface is brought back by Selene in Necrotia, and Leland would be revived by the 5 on Krakoa for some political reasons that elude me, ATM. Turns out he's the father of Shinobi Shaw, which means absolutely nothing to me, but I know Shinobi is relevant, so there's that. The actual fight between the exhumed is where the magic of the group lies, if any. Mutant teams are combo central, and the mix-up of abilities is the treat. Seeing Roxy and Magma at the gala, Strong Guy and KP, Jean and Jugger, that's what the X-Men are all about. This gothic graveyard team draped in the shadows of the first X-Men is a great aesthetic. I found the skulls for Scaleface's little tail swipe to be a nice choice. That was until She-Hulk punches her into cream cheese. And that's really the fight in a nutshell. Each member shows how they could theoretically go toe-to-toe with She-Hulk on a good day. The diamond skin hurts her hand, Scaleface can knock her off her feet but can't take a punch, and Harry Leland's gravity altering can keep her immobile for long enough to matter. The team is kinda anti-She-Hulk, but they're all half dead, so they only work at about 40% of what they would be alive, which is unfortunate because they would all need 100% to stand up to Ginny on her sick day. The word exhume means to dig up from the ground, to expose, preferably a corpse. And expose they did. Firstly, by letting us know that no X is safe around mutants. They will chop that first letter off and put the X front and center every time. Secondly, the team exposes a odd sub-corner of the Marvel Universe where resides all the mutants that aren't X-Men, but also aren't Summers related and haven't been in any popular TV. Once you get away from the growing cast of easy to recognize mutants, everyone else is the Doom Patrol. Peculiar superhumans whose powers hurt more than help, if you can call them powers in the first place. I like seeing X-Men run off given so much style and vision. They didn't aim too high and found some comfortable space in some She-Hulk comics for these mutants to get a little bit more shine. Scaleface is what brought me here. And seeing this poor runaway unable to rest, she was so tired of running and fighting, and here she is in the most Bugs Bunny of schemes as far as supervillains go. Like, this is Enator level thinking. With all of that said and done, let's go over the exhumed once more, now that we know who they are. Harry Leland, a former Hellfire villain befallen by Nimrod, Kevin Sidney, the Changeling, mutant turned martyr, Jack Winters, the Living Diamond, a small-time mutant who has the power to round out any origin story, and the tragic and the beautiful Scaleface, the Morlock who escaped fate just long enough to meet it again, shot down by the cops probably hours after avoiding the massacre. Even though everyone here is a villain, the more nebulous nature of mutant morality makes it easy for me to still look at them a bit neutral, except in the case of Jack, who got what he deserved through and through. Harry and Kevin in the end tried to do some good before it was said and done, and Scaleface has only ever defended herself. The team is like a sampler of the X-Men's past. 2 villains from bygone eras turned allies, 1 fuckwit and 1 Scaleface. For my last trick, I will attempt to put together my own mutant zombie squad. I'm gonna try to keep it to actually dead mutants, but realistically I'm gonna pull mostly from the mutants who have died before. And maybe I'll just make a member a zombie if I want them to be on the team that bad. First up, replacing Harry Leland is Jean Grey, which I know is picking Superman for your fantasy softball team, but as a staple dead X-Man and one of the most powerful telepaths on the planet, a right exhumed made with the intention of being a real threat to a Hulk would be perfect with Jean front and center. Telekinesis and telepathy, years of know-how using them, and she's not too broken because someone like Black Talon couldn't even use Changeling to his full potential. Also, Jean is right at home in the burial garb, as Talon calls it. Next up for my team is Armor. Kill Armor in a sentinel attack or something and then have her resurrect with some black spiky dead man armor. She's my human diamond replacement and she's gonna do a lot more than hurt your hand.
How is your hand?
This is where I say elixir, but 2 Omegas on a team that originally had none is egregious, and so instead for my last 2 picks, replacing Changeling and Scaleface, I have Justice and Pixie. Justice is the perfect non-X mutant, a strong telekinetic. He's like Mutant Deku with his special interest in superheroes, and without the history of the X-Men hanging over his character, him dying and coming back would be pretty fresh. Pixie is prime zombie material. Her powers have a light creature factor to them, and after some limbo stuff, she gained a soul dagger. The idea is a zombie Pixie that just causes hallucinations and maybe some soul stabs here and there. But as I'm typing, I realized that Wolfsbane replaces Scaleface much easier, and though I like Justice, he's too strong for the exhumed. And so for the final lineup, I'm thinking Wolfsbane, Pixie, Armor, and Jean Grey. And if it seems like I have a bias for the ladies, you're observant. Jean is a full headache, perhaps neutered by the Witch Doctor effect. Armor could actually fight the She-Hulk up close, and Pixie and Wolfsbane, while not a handful for Ginny alone, together are a different story. Range, speed, and strength with the nuisance of pixie dust sounds like a problem for an early 90s She-Hulk, seen here struggling a bit with the Living Diamond and fucking Scaleface. I can admit that my exhumed lineup is bloated, OP, and a complete departure from the E-list mutant vibe of the original team. Jean, Armor, Pix, and Rain could be a team in their own right, like an offshoot of A-Force or the lineup for New Age Mechanics. My point in picking characters this significant is to show how insane the concept of the exhumed could be if they appeared in some actual X-Men. All you need is 4 dead mutants and a Brother Blood, Voodoo, Black Talon, Selene type to wake them up. With almost every corner of the X-Men mythos being refurbished during the Krakoan era, where even fucking fallen angels is remembered, it's ironic that no one wants to resurrect the exhumed. The X-Men sometimes feel like a whole separate universe within Marvel. The characters, stories, and themes of the X-Men are so numerous that you could chop mutants off the Marvel Megazord and make their own standalone verse. The exhumed are a microcosm of that effect. Far, far away from the mansion, here are some mutants with no shared history together just for funsies. They literally got some X-Men in my She-Hulk. What do you think of the exhumed? If they showed up again, where would you like to see them, and who would be in the roster? Mutants and X-Men have kind of taken over my creative process. I know I mentioned wanting to see the exhumed again, but to be honest, it's refreshing to see a section of X history that isn't miles long and needlessly complex, because what's the deal with Dominions, am I right? After the Mutant Massacre video, I kind of wanted a break from all the X research, but I found the exhumed too wacky and Doom Patrol to not want to dive on in.
No, I won't do dive on in. Dive on in.
Next time it's X time, I'm hoping to get some standalone and non-canon stuff to avoid the historical fatigue that comes with this continuity. I'm also hoping to give comic editing a break too, because of all the fucking Ken burns, but somebody's gotta make that Delilah video.